I am so excited to introduce our guest today. Bonita Ford is the author of Embers of Hope, Embracing Life in an Age of Ecological Destruction and Climate Chaos. She teaches permaculture, ecological design, nonviolent communication, cooperative communication, Reiki and energy work, and gardening. And she has led workshops around the world for over 18 years. Bonita loves eating wild foods, talking to the plants, and dancing barefoot on the earth. I'm so glad to report we have that in common.
Welcome, Bonita.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Aimee and Laura, for having me. I'm so grateful to be here. And I'm so grateful that the tech is working right now.
Yes, we did have some tech issues prior to the call, but it's working now, and the world has,
Here we are, and I'm thankful for that. And I'm going to take a second to be present in my body. I invite everyone to do the same. Check in with your breath, get centered in your gravity, and notice where your body is touching your chair, where your feet are touching the ground. And with that, I'd like to get started.
Thank you.
So many of the topics in your book correlate with our 10-step program. Things focus on change and uncertainty, honoring mortality, gratitude, doing inner work. We are so excited to finally connect and meet you, because it just seems like when we were reading your book that we found a long lost friend. And we're excited to talk about some of those overlaps in mortality and gratitude. But before we did that, I just wanted to kind of set the container that we have that much in common before we go right into the grief, because we both are driven by grief. And I know that can get heavy quick. And so I wanted to start out by asking about gratitude, and also in gratitude, your energy work and embodiment stuff, and if you think they're related in any way, anything your mind or heart wants to say about that.
I'm just really noticing that my heart is feeling very full in this moment, and I'm feeling this mix of giddiness and almost like being on the verge of happy tears. Like I just feel like I could cry just from gratitude for being together. And I think for me, gratitude it's a doorway into presence. It's a doorway into this moment. And I think for me, it's been an important part of my life, because I can very easily get stuck in uncontrollable wild trains of thought that don't necessarily support me in going where I want to go. And I really find that gratitude helps me focus on this moment, on what I have today. I was sitting meditating this afternoon, and I hadn't meditated this week yet. And so I was just really noticing my worries and anxieties around COVID and around the world and our losses of freedom right now, and not being connected to loved ones, and wondering when will be the next time we'll be able to gather in community, and how will our lives be different for better or worse, and just thinking of all those things. And as I was meditating, I just really kept bringing myself back to my breath and where I am in this moment, and just realizing, oh, I'm grateful right now for being warm. I'm grateful for being in a quiet space. I'm grateful for being in a safe home. I'm grateful for having this comfortable cushion to sit on. I'm grateful for having a full belly. And it just, all of these noticings that were with me in that very moment slowly helped to turn the volume down on all of the worries and all of the questions and the what ifs that I didn't have any answers to. And so for me, gratitude is, it's a really feel good tool in practice. And it's also a very practical tool in practice that I find really serves me in my regular life. It just really helps me connect with what I have right now and where I am. And when I do that, I really see how good my life is. And I want to live from that place. I find it very easy. And I think, as you said, Aimee, earlier, just like how when we connect with our grief, it can be very easy to dive deep into that or to get pulled very deeply into that. And I think I'm the kind of person that it's easier for me to get stuck in worry and in despair and in depression. And it's much harder for me to lift myself up. And gratitude is one of those practices that I use on a regular daily basis to help myself live well, help myself to empower myself to live in a really good, just in a good way, in a way that is full of joy, in a way that is full of vital energy. And I don't manage that all the time. And it's a step towards that.
I think this will, I'll share a bit of a story. Some of our good grievers will already know this about me, but gratitude for me in the beginning kind of felt like pressure. I have had a lot of clinical depression, and my therapist would tell me, like, make a gratitude list, and it turned into kind of a shame storm of everything I should feel grateful for, but couldn't actually feel grateful for because I felt so depressed and had all these judgments about it. But the revolutionary moment happened when I kind of gave myself permission to let go of everything I should be grateful for and said, what in this moment can I actually feel gratitude for? And I noticed the birds singing near me at the park where I was, trying to make this list. And it was the first moment I went to grad school for writing. I saw myself as a writer, but for some reason I had never, as a writer, contemplated the miraculous nature of literacy and that we can put symbols on a page. And I just felt that in that moment in my body. And that's when all of a sudden I just was hooked on gratitude. And for me, I find it's a practice that, I can't go to gratitude in my most tumultuous moments unless I've been practicing it in the little moments. But if I've been practicing it in the little moments, I've had some profound experiences where I tap into that gratitude amongst that tumult, and it centers me and it gives me a clarity. And I am grateful for gratitude, I guess, is what I'm saying there. And I think it's not opposite of grief. I think gratitude, that grief can deepen our gratitude. And so
I love that. Yeah.
Question,
it makes so much sense to me.
Thank you. And yeah, the question we were going to lead with, but then I realized it would take us deep quickly. And I wanted to give us a little moment to kind of connect before that. But the title of the book is Embers of Hope, Embracing Life in an Age of Ecological Destruction and Climate Chaos. And we'd love to hear about what inspired you to write it. We know a bit about it from having read the book, but we'd love to let our listeners in on the story behind that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it took me about 6.5 years to write and edit the book. And prior to that, for maybe about 3 or 4 years, let's say 3 years, I had an idea for a book in my head, and I started an outline, and it just wasn't, I started the introduction several times and it wasn't coming together. And then at some point, a very, very dear friend was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And she shared that with us. And she also shared with us that she wanted to, so she basically, she wrote to a group of close friends. And after she'd had some time to digest her diagnosis, she shared with us that she really wanted to focus on her healing. That yes, this diagnosis, it was possible that she would die in a year, maybe in 10 years. She didn't know, maybe the diagnosis was wrong. And so she started going to see alternative practitioners, and she really spent a lot of time focusing on just being aware of her thoughts and the stories that she was telling herself, and her, just how she was responding mentally to the symptoms, to her struggles, to her the changes in her body, and the stories that she would make around that. And so for her, it was a very spiritual journey. It was a very spiritual period of her life, and she was very intentional on healing her. She had, the way I like to describe it is that she had the intention to heal, and she had the vision to recover her health and all of her physical abilities fully. And also at some point in that process, she I was at her home, and she and her husband showed me, she had redone her power of attorney over health paperwork and her will, and she said, I want you to look at these papers and just be familiar with them, and don't dwell on them, because I don't think we're going to need them. And for me, throughout that process, and especially as I look back, I realized how powerful it was to be with someone who was focusing energetically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally on creating the life and the reality that she wanted for herself. And at the same time, holding space for the possibility that what she wanted would not come to pass. So from our conversations and from the way she held herself, I would say she tried to put the majority of her energy into creating a healthy present and future for herself. And when her despair would come up, when her doubt would come up, when her fear would come up, she would meet that, and she would continue to do what she needed to do in that day, in that week, and also try and put things in order just in case things didn't turn out the way she wanted to. And so as we went through that process with her, and she did end up dying, and it was one of the most it was one of the most amazing moments, days, weeks of my life, just being with her, her husband, being with her daughter through that process. We were holding hands with her as she breathed her last breaths, and we were singing to her, and it was such a powerful transition. And I really had that experience, that it was a transition, not just an ending, not just a door closing. I experienced it as a transition to something different, something else. And as I was going through that process, and then in the months afterwards, I just had so much to write about. It was kind of like something, just, the lid on my creativity, it just kind of popped off, and I just had so much to say. And I realized that her journey for me was such a powerful metaphor for how I want to live in this time in the world. So when I look at the uncertainty about the future of the human species, the future of life on Earth, when I think about climate breakdown, when I think about just the loss of the destruction and loss of ecosystems, when I think about the dying of the oceans, I have so much despair that just wells up in my heart, and it overwhelms me completely. And what I learned with my friend Catherine was that I don't have to choose one thing or the other. And I think that for many of us as activists, as scientists, as environmental teachers, as farmers, as teachers, as parents, we kind of, it's probably cultural as well too, that we kind of I think we have this tendency to either, and I think social media also kind of feeds it, that we kind of have this, it's so easy to argue with ourselves and with each other. And so to either think, oh, we're doomed, we're fucked, it's over, and then give up and just drink ourselves into oblivion, or just, give up and not address the depression that I struggle with, and just burying myself in that hole. Or yes, it's possible, we have the solutions, yes, of course we can do this, and rally people towards these possibilities that exist. And I really realized in this process with Catherine that I don't have to choose one or the other, because I actually can't authentically choose one or the other, that both are very present for me. And if I was simply to completely give in to my kind of natural tendency towards despair, I would stop doing this work. And I don't want to live like that. I don't want to live the rest of my life as if I'm already dead, as if none of my efforts matter, because I still have today. I've had a lot of todays, and tomorrow isn't guaranteed, but I have this moment right now, and I'm talking with all of you. And so that's what inspired me to write this book. It was just this very personal journey that really wove itself through my heart, through my spirit, and really just into the foundation of the work that I do, and into the foundation of the way I live in the world. And so that's what I really hope to offer readers and share with readers, is this, a little of that journey, and the possibility that we can face our despair, and that if we're honest about what we struggle with, and if we're really kind and gentle with ourselves, and if we really do the work, the inner work, that inner healing work, that I do think that taking that deep dive into our dark places, into our depression, into our grief, into our deep grief, our personal grief and our collective grief, our personal trauma and our collective trauma, that I think that there is some really powerful potential there. And it can be small, and they can just be the tiniest sparks of potential. It doesn't necessarily even feel big when we first discover them. And that's what this book is about. It's just about those tiny seeds of possibility and they don't grow easily, right? Like, if for anybody that struggled with just with depression or anxiety or trauma or personal grief, it's not easy to say follow your bliss. It's not easy to say just, well, bring your passion into the world. It takes work. It takes work to plant those seeds. It takes work to nurture those seeds. And that's what this book is about. It's about that journey that hopefully helps us find the courage, the presence to plant those seeds, and do as much as we can to give them life. And there's no guarantee that they will be well and grow into trees and forests, and if we don't plant them, they never will. So that was the seed, the baby seed of the book.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
I am lighting up all over the place. There are like 7 threads that I want to follow. The first one is that I just want to repeat your words that I don't want to live as if I'm already dead.
Mm.
That was so powerful to hear.
Mm.
And I think, you know, I first heard you speak at a different, at the Canadian Eco Psychology Network. You were doing a talk on your book, and everything just resonated. Your personal story. Aimee and I were joking as we were reading your book that I feel like you're half of me and half of Aimee. You embody both of our stories really well, and I think part of my personal story is that I lived a tremendous amount of my life sort of already dead. I experienced the loss of some loved ones when I was in high school, and I didn't have the tools or anything to make it out of that. And so I deadened inside. I just stopped feeling. I didn't know how to do the inner work that was required to keep going. And then I came to the conclusion, with the help of Aimee, who is my longtime best friend and now wife, basically, like, we get to make choices about how we live. And do you want to die before you're already dead? And the notion, or the invitation that you spoke about having the courage to plant these seeds and to cultivate these seeds is hard work, but it's harder work to remain shut out, or to shut up people out, or to refuse to feel, and just to refuse to cultivate those seeds. And life, as I've experienced it, is just the continual invitation for connection. And so I'm going to pause there, because there were 7 other threads that I could go on, but I'm sure something's bubbling up for you too.
Yeah, this hour's going to go too fast.
I think it already is.
And I hope someday we can hang out with you in a spacious way. So I'm like, oh my God, which way do I want to go? Thank you. First of all, I feel like your words are medicine for my heart. So thank you. Yeah, we want to for sure talk about gardening before the hours.
Okay.
We just started gardening this past summer, and it's transformed our life and the way you write about it. But I feel like we're in the grief tenderly, and so I'm not ready to go there yet.
Yeah.
Well, so one of our steps is about honoring mortality, and it's what's funny is not a lot of folks know this, that a lot of our good grievers come to good grief after a loss of someone close to them. That their personal grief somehow opens them to the collective grief in a new way. And we see this trend a lot. And I've really, through this work, come to love grief, even though it feels funny to say, because when I'm in it, it's so heart-wrenching and feels like it can even, kill me sometimes. It just feels like too much, until, it's what I love about good grief spaces is we come into community and we bring that grief and we go there. And now that I have dedicated my life to showing up for grief and to honoring grief, I think it's one of the most powerful tools for connection we have. And I tell folks that, like, when I'm in grief about something, like, it pierces through the bullshit in a way that nothing else does. It gives me a fierceness, something that wasn't there before, and it completely transforms me. And so I want to go deeper into the because you write in detail about deaths that happen close to you, and how you let it how it, the book you mentioned comes from that, but it also sounded like you chose to reorient your life from some of that grief. And so that may lead to gardening. It's not required. We're going to come to it later too, but I would just love to hear anything more that you'd like to offer. I guess also about how grief, yes, and also, like, we like to talk about mortality in a theoretical way, and how kind of our denial of mortality as a culture is doing a lot of harm. And so I just want to hear you talk more about any of those things. I hope that's not too open. Please go with anything that feels like that.
Thank you, Aimee and Laura. Well, I think when I think about mortality in particular, I think the experiences I've had around loved ones dying, crossing over, and also just supporting other people in community, just through volunteering at the local day hospice. So I remember, maybe, I don't know if it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, hearing about a friend that was doing hospice work. And I was just astounded by the idea that she could hold space for people that were dying, and that she would choose to do that, and that it was a joyful, life enriching path for her. I couldn't connect to that. I couldn't relate to that at all. And I think just some of the experiences I've had with people have really, like you said, Aimee, it just, for me, it just kind of pierces through the barriers and the bullshit. And I think I feel the most alive in those spaces, because we
Mhm.
don't have time to lose in those spaces. So let's just say what we have to say and really be real with each other. And so I think having those experiences with people in my life gave me a a level of comfort and acceptance around death and dying that I didn't have maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And I think that has really served me well when I look at the state of the world, when I look at the state of the planet, because sometimes when part of me, or I think, the part of me that grew up with this idea of like, save the whales and save the rainforests, and then later it was like, what? Save the humans? What? Like, where we might go extinct in a generation or two or three or four? Like, that's mind blowing. And and I think when those parts of me came together, it's connected to what I was talking about earlier, that idea that I had to make a choice, that I had to be this idealistic, oh, but we can save the world, we can make a difference, life can be good. And that that younger, more idealistic, more naive part of myself, when brought together with that part of me that was learning about near-term extinction, the sixth, the like mass extinction now, um, and just the idea of the collapse of ecosystems, and the collapse of the biosphere, of what we need to survive. And so these are the challenging realities that we're facing. And so when I held all that together, it was really confusing. It was really hard to hold all of that together. And I think what helped me come to terms with being okay with holding the possibility of, oh, humans might go extinct. This civilization might be going down, and we might be here to see some, we're already seeing stuff that it's just heartbreaking. Um, so when I held all that together, it was confusing. It was really hard. And I think what helped me hold those mind-boggling, horrifying realities was just the idea of, but we do die. We do die. I'm going to die. We're all going to die. And if I can make peace with that in an existential sense, then that just, I don't know, it helped me reconcile that a little bit more. It helped me maybe not panic so much at this big uncertainty of, holy shit, sixth mass extinction and humans might be going. We might. And we're all still dying. Like, that's the reality, right? So even if even if the species doesn't go extinct, we as individuals are all still going to die. So it just helped me hold all of that with a little bit more equanimity, with just a little bit more groundedness. Um, it's not to say that I can't say that I don't fear death. I can't say that I don't feel horrible and terrified when I think about life being completely annihilated on this planet. And when I remind myself that I'm human, and I remind myself that I don't know how many breaths I will have left, I don't know how many days I will have left, and I come back to that place of presence and I come back to gratitude, then I don't spin out with the big worries of, holy shit, near-term extinction. Oh my God, what do we do? It is a fair question. And I want to hold it in a productive way, because when I'm freaking out, I'm actually not being productive. I can't address it clearly in my mind. And when my heart and my emotions are completely overwhelmed, I can't really be present with myself and with all of you in a real way. I'm actually not. I'm just kind of in the blender of my emotions and in the blender of what my mind is creating and the stories that I'm telling myself. And so I think that's that's part of the medicine of learning to hold death. I'm not, I'm not an expert at it. And I think, and maybe that's part of what this process is. I think it's a spiritual process that we get to work with throughout our lives, is grappling with our mortality. And how do we live our best lives? How do we contribute in meaningful ways to our communities and build resilient, vibrant, beautiful communities, knowing that none of this is forever?
Yeah. Yeah, it's making me think of, there's like, we're living in a time of great paradox, and a couple times you've mentioned this embracing of both, this yes and type of mentality. And I keep thinking about, you taught us a lesson about Buddhism in the book, and it's a lesson about first and second arrows. And I would love if you can teach all of our listeners about this, because for me, I think it's the crux of what we're being called to do here, is to identify which are the first arrows and which are the second arrows. And then how do we proceed with calming our nervous system so we can be of service to our communities and can be of service in our lives to the bigger magic that's unfolding around us.
I really appreciated that teaching too. And so I read it in a book by a Buddhist teacher, and I think I've heard it from different Buddhist teachers. And so I think it was a teaching from the Buddha, and he talked about the first arrow and the second arrow, and the idea is that none of us can escape. So from a Buddhist perspective, from the Buddhist teachings, none of us can escape death and illness and old age and, did I say sickness? Sickness. We're humans. We're animals in this physical form. And so those are the first arrows. So whatever circumstance we get hit with, so whether that is having an accident or having a heart attack or getting hit by a bus or whatever that is, we can't escape that first arrow. That's just life. However, the second arrows are the stories that we tell ourselves, that we make up around that first arrow. So aging is just a fact of life. We can't escape that. But when we complain about it, when we berate ourselves around it, when we go into those shoulds, oh, but I should be able to do this. I used to be able to do this. Oh, but I really should be exercising more. My medications, why aren't they working anymore? I should get on a new medication. And so when we start spinning these stories, those are the second arrows that create more suffering. And so the first arrows, we can't stop, but the second arrows are completely of our own making, and we create more turmoil and inner suffering from firing those second arrows at ourselves. And so if we can learn to, just through self-awareness, through presence, noticing what we're telling ourselves, noticing our own complaints, noticing our own shoulds and should nots. It shouldn't have been like this. It's not fair that I got hit by that car. It's not fair that I'm getting older. It's not fair that I had this shoulder pain. It's not fair that my spouse died. This shouldn't be happening. Well, those things did happen, and it is life. And all of what we tell ourselves around that, those are the second arrows that we can, over time, with practice, slowly learn to put down, to soften. Or, when we notice that we're doing that to ourselves, we can just not add fuel to that fire and just redirect our attention elsewhere.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about how we begin to notice these second arrows. Like you said, it's kind of a cultivated practice. And one of the things that are really great about your book is that you have a tremendous amount of exercises at the back end. And you kind of carry us through a journey of looking inward and turning inward. But that's not it. Like, even at the end of some of your sections, you sort of say like, oof, this was tough. Like, how you doing? Take a breath, breathe. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of bringing it back to the body and of turning inward. And I see that as the way that we start identifying these second arrows, is really this embodiment practice. But I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit.
Thank you for that question, Laura. I think, well, for myself, I've found that embodiment is another tool to presence. So we talked about gratitude earlier. And for me, physical embodiment, so whether that is sitting and meditating and focusing on the body, or whether it's taking a walk and just focusing on the walk and not focusing on all the stuff that's going on in my mind, or dancing, or going for a bike ride, or going for a hike, or whatever it is that helps us move and be in our bodies and notice sensation. I find that, or just even doing the dishes and really trying to focus on the physical act of doing the dishes, and the temperature of the water, and the texture of the dishcloth, and the feel of the soap. For me, embodiment is an invitation into, it's a doorway into presence. And I guess by really focusing on the body, at least in my experience, I have less energy to be firing those second arrows. When my attention is focused on hanging up the laundry and taking each item and shaking it out and putting it on the laundry rack, I have less bandwidth for all of the complaining that I like to do of, oh, but it's more fun to be sitting by the fire instead of having to do the laundry. And, oh, I wish I could be, just reading today. And, oh, why do we have so much laundry? But if I can actually focus on the doing of it instead of focusing on the complaining of the doing of it, then it kind of, there's less energy for it. It turns the volume down on it. And then maybe when those complaints or all of that inner chatter does arise, it helps me notice, oh, I'm actually not focusing on what I'm doing anymore. I'm back in this chatter again. What about the two of you? What is your experience with embodiment? Because I know, Aimee, you started us off, and I really appreciated that, just with taking the moment to notice sitting in the chair and noticing our bodies. So what is your experience with embodiment been?
Yeah, I am a yoga teacher, and I became a yoga teacher because yoga saved my life many times. And as someone prone to anxiety and depression, connecting with my body has completely transformed my experience of what it means to be alive. And when you were speaking, I was thinking of there's an On Being episode with a yoga instructor named Matthew Sanford, and he's in a wheelchair, and he says, and he's known for like making creative yoga poses to help folks with disabilities and veterans. And and Krista Tippett said this interview changed her, like, I don't know if changed her life might be a bit strong, but also maybe not, because she talked about how being in the studio with this man who was so in his body in a way she'd never experienced, that she couldn't explain kind of what it was about him, but that something was different after the interview. And I think what it was is he's so fully embodied, and he was talking about how he's never seen someone connect deeper with their body and not also become more open-hearted and compassionate. And that I've kind of been thinking about how I kind of wish we could just go around and say, like, everybody connect with your bodies, because everyone's so politically charged that, like, they can't let folks in. And that if we just say the real message is connect with your body, connect with the earth, be in the garden, get dirty, like, and that's actually got like a little bit of a hidden agenda to it, because once folks start doing that, and we really connect with our bodies and our hearts and our spirits, we don't want to cause harm. And we know that we're causing harm, and we don't know how to stop because we're a part of these bigger systems. And so for me, I can spiral so quickly any given day. And that's when I come back to my body. And so I would say for me, it's been a life-saving device.
Yeah. Well, and going back to my story about earlier, experiencing these losses and these traumas pretty young, I did not live in my body at all. In fact, my body was a painful place to be. And so it's just been in the last few years that I've even been inviting myself back in. And so it's like the start of a whole new relationship of trying to feel sensations. And sometimes I don't notice that I'm angry until I'm like too angry. Sometimes I don't notice if I'm like really agitated or feeling despair until it's over the top. And so I think for those of us who experience a lot of trauma, mending that relationship between our sort of emotional lives and our body and sensations is a whole different journey. And for those people who are listening and who have experienced trauma, I want to let them know that it's totally worth it, and that it's really painful and it's disorienting. But if you don't actually feel your feelings, they don't go away, they just get stuffed. And then that leads to more anxiety. And as we're facing more chaos and more tumult in the world, it's really helpful to start processing those feelings. And so as a part of our groups, we always incorporate some amount of embodiment exercises, whether they're breathing and just invitations to start noticing when you get ramped up, so that you're not already ramped up before you can kind of scale it back. I'm also thinking about how—
And thank you for that question.
I'm also thinking about how connection to body is also really helped by things like gardening. And so I think this is a good into that sort of conversation. But like, you teach permaculture, you know a lot about permaculture. First, can you tell our listeners what permaculture is? And then can we have a little bit of a discussion around gardening and transitions in gardens?
Mm-hmm. So permaculture is such a small word, and it encompasses so much. So I guess there are two definitions that I like to use. One is that I would describe it as a holistic approach to design. So it's based on an understanding of and mimicking of natural systems. The other way that I like to describe permaculture is I think of it as a language that we can learn or relearn. And it's for those of us who grew up in a culture that did not teach us to meet our needs for food and shelter and transportation and livelihood in a way that is in harmony with the rest of the living world. And so permaculture is one doorway back into that. And the word comes from permanent agriculture as well as permanent culture. And a lot of permaculture writing does focus on gardening and land-based applications. So permaculture design and the permaculture principles are often used in gardens, on farms, on larger pieces of land or smaller pieces of land. And those same tools, those same ideas, those same principles can be applied to anything that we're designing. So whether we're designing a business or an event or a website, we can still take those same principles and have that inform our thinking and our planning and our decision making. So that's permaculture in a nutshell.
Thank you.
And it doesn't necessarily lead us to getting our hands dirty, though I think for probably most permaculture practitioners, it does.
I'm going to read this quote to you, and then we have a story.
Okay.
About it. And it goes, okay, I'll just read the quote. Or do you want to read
No.
it? Okay.
Thank you, though.
Gardening has given me countless opportunities to be aware of change, to practice surrendering, and to accept death. And a short story that I wanted to share with you is, as Aimee mentioned toward the beginning of our conversation, we had our first garden this summer, and it like really brought me alive. Like I'm on the computer all the time. I'm always organizing. I'm always sending emails. And for the first time, I was able to sort of step away and start really cultivating these little beings, and I developed relationships with them. And then towards the end of the season, it came time where my tomato plants were just gonna die because that's what they do. And I took it really hard.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know how to say bye to them because I'd had this great time with them and they've been giving me fruit, and you captured it so well, right? How many opportunities of change and practicing surrender and accepting death do we have that, this is both small and large. I'm not losing my partner. I'm losing a plant that is supposed to die, and it's a natural cycle of its life. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to this quote that you offered us here.
Oh, I love your story. Actually, I think it describes it better than I could. Oh, wow. Thank you.
Really broke my heart.
Yeah.
Which I actually it was beautiful to witness, because as she mentioned, when I first met Laura, she bragged that she didn't feel anything. That was 12 years ago now.
Yeah.
And she's come so far in doing this work. And so to see her grieving tomato plants in the garden, I'm going to get teary-eyed just retelling it and thinking of it. But that level of feeling and connectedness to life. And our roommate who helped us do the garden and is a landscaper often reminds us that death is a part of the life cycle. Like you can't die if you're not alive, right? Like it's part of it. And so I'm grateful that we got to tell that story and have it met with empathy as well. Thank you.
Well, and it goes back to this embodiment that it's like you go into the garden and you notice another shoot, another leaf, or there's a new flower to look at. Like even if we feel stuck in our daily lives, we can go into our gardens and notice something new, and that keeps growing and changing. And so why aren't we growing and changing? Like we're also living beings. We're also dynamic. And even if we feel stuck, sometimes it takes forever for your I don't know, plant to form or your fruit to form. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remind me, did you start gardening young? Did you have a garden as a kid?
We had a tiny little corner of our backyard, and I don't even think we had more than 5 tomato plants in my childhood. Yeah. So it was like maybe once every couple of years we'd have a tomato plant, and that would be really exciting. And then we would, maybe forget about it. And so no, I didn't grow up with that. And my first year of gardening was also just full of, wow, I can put them in the ground and I can water them and then they're going to grow. What do you mean? And then what do you mean they're going to die? What?
Yeah.
It was just all of this love and shock and so much learning. And I had and I still have a very hard time weeding. I have a very hard time pulling out plants. I'm still not good at it. I was just saying that to Bastu last night. We've got some greens under grow lights for the first time this winter, and he's much more, okay, you know, like, these guys are bolting, it's time to go. And I was just like, okay, sorry, everybody, you're going to the compost, we're going to eat you. I'm sorry. You did your best. I'm sorry. No, I don't really want to. Are you sure we need to do this right now? And he kind of looks at me and he's like, you put this off for already, you know, several weeks. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. So it's still this ongoing practice. It's still this ongoing practice of letting go, of accepting that process. And I think when I think about gardening and I think about surrender, it also can, I'm reminded also about, so in the first few years of being here in our garden, the weather patterns were fairly normal. And so we put our gardens in, the plants grew, they grew happily and things went well, and we slowly expanded our gardens. And then we had a drought year, and then we had flooding, and then we had another drought year, and then we had more flooding. And each of those wild and weird years, certain things didn't grow. Some years we got very, very little, and it was really super disheartening to think, oh my gosh, if we didn't have grocery stores, if we didn't have access to the farmers market or farmers, it would be a really hard winter. And I think that was part of learning, part of just this very simple understanding of, oh, right, I can be a good gardener, I can be an experienced gardener, and I can't control what grows. Yeah. Right? If it's a drought year, I can water all I want and I can keep things alive, but they're still not going to thrive. And for me, that is part of living with climate weirdness right now. And that's also part of learning to live. It's, you know, like what we were talking about earlier, that there are some things that we can't control. Like, this is life, right? Yeah. We put seeds in the ground, or for those of us on this call that have children, we don't have our own children, but we have nephews and a niece, and so we love the young people in our lives, and they go into the world, and we don't get to control the choices that they make for themselves. And so there's so much in our lives that we love and we nurture and we interact with, and we don't control everything. And I think that's part of that lesson of surrender. And the garden is so good at teaching me that every single year, every single season, there's some new amazement, some new surprise, some new disappointment, something new to, you know, cry about. So, and it's interesting too, like, especially in my early 20s, I struggled with mild depression, and it was kind of just ongoing, and I didn't know what I was struggling with or dealing with. It was just like, oh, this is who I am. This is what's normal. Apparently it wasn't, but I mean, that was my normal at that time. And what I kept I was living in Toronto at the time. What I kept gravitating towards was just any little patch of green. And when I think back to that version of that younger part of me, I think, oh my gosh, like, I just feel so much for her. I'm like, oh, it's just this little patch of green, that little park. It wasn't even a park, like this little place where there was a fountain, like between the two buildings, where I would just go and sit in the grass at lunchtime. And it was this, my heart and my body were so drawn to that greenery, to that life, that I didn't like. So, you know, back to your earlier question, I didn't grow up with gardening. And if I had grown up with gardening, maybe I would have known that when I'm in the garden and when my fingernails are full of dirt, or when I'm walking out in the woods, or even if I'm just walking outside and breathing and feeling my body and feeling the air, I feel better. So when I struggle with, and I still have those ups and downs, they're still a part of my life. And now I just have better tools to manage them. And so I didn't know that when I was in my 20s. And so I just struggled with this prolonged low period for, for a year or two, maybe more. And I only very, very slowly dug my way out of it because I didn't know what I could do at the time to help myself. And so again, the tools we've been talking about, gratitude and embodiment and connecting with nature being so important. And I didn't know any of those things.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for our garden. I'm so grateful for so many things right now. Yeah.
Thank you. Me too. I'm feeling it.
I noticed that we're at time, and so
oh my gosh,
I know we could go on, like we could talk for hours longer.
We could do this for hours. Let's do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. We had selected a few passages that we wanted to read because they're just really, they get us thinking at a deeper level. And so I'd like to read just one.
If you listen deeply, what desperate cries from the world do you hear? And if you listen deeper still, what embers of possibility might you find in the depths of your heart?
All right. Okay, I want to read another piece from Embers of Hope. So Bonita wrote that she has 4 guiding questions, and I would love to share them with all of you because I think that they're great for journaling, they're great for reflecting. The first one is, how might I create meaning and happiness in my life through helping others or taking care of the earth? The second one, how might I apply my passions and purpose to helping my community or the greater world? The third, how might I live so that I may be at peace when I die? And the fourth, how might I share love and nourishment today? I think those 4 invitations are beautiful, and I'm really grateful for them. And I have some of my own guiding questions, and I'm grateful when somebody else gets to bring theirs along, and then I get to incorporate them into my life as well. So thank you, Bonita.
Thank you, Laura. What are your guiding questions?
Well, okay, so is it honest and authentic? The first one. How does it fit now in this time and place? And then the third one is, what moves me?
I love that.
Yeah, thank you. What are your guiding questions?
Yeah, it's funny. I was like, do I have guiding questions? I think connection. I'm authentic connection though. I am kind of an introvert and have social anxiety in a lot of situations. And so when I am in public places and small, I actually, despite what I just said, really enjoy small talk with strangers. But I like finding the openings of where can we connect, because I don't want to argue about things. I want to just get a glimpse into other folks' lives. And I think some of my most beautiful transformative conversations have come in airports with strangers and people whose names I don't even know. And so I think anything that brings connection. I also DJ a bit, and so music is kind of my go-to. Music is my driving connector for everything I do. Just that. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Right.
Be well. Sending all the best to all of you and your loved ones, your communities, and all the places where you live. Thank you, thank you, thank you.